welcome back to SEO On-Air. Today we have Travis McKnight, a content strategy architect at Portent. Before shifting to the digital marketing world, Travis spent many years in journalism, which helped him fuel his passion for authentic storytelling. He now helps clients create meaningful content that delivers a refined user experience. Before starting the podcast, Travis and I realized we had a shared interest in Dungeons and Dragons. So we talk about that first before getting into other topics. Here's how it started. I want to know a couple of things first. How long have you been playing Dungeons and Dragons? How long have you been a dungeon master?
Yeah,
I'll
so
ask
I've
again
been
after that.
sure. I've been playing D&D consistently for about the past 8 years, mostly with the same group. I started playing version 3 when I was in college and high school and kind of fell out of it for a while. And then after college, I started playing 3.5 and then eventually the 5th edition, which is the current edition. And I've been fortunate enough to actually play with the same group online for about a little bit more than 7 years now. And we play every week. Sometimes we miss one here or there when schedules don't align, but for the most part, weekly. And I'm not a consistent dungeon master. I've done 4 campaigns, so
Okay.
I'm mostly a player, but I do enjoy DMing. I do enjoy weaving the story and the improv aspects of it alongside seeing people who I normally play with all get to play together.
And maybe as different characters in the game, because they might be quiet in real life and then they're just an aggressive attacker in the game.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of my favorite things about D&D in general is you can really project different aspects of yourself into that world and environment where a lot of the times you're not always that way in real life. Like in real life, I'm generally a quiet, shy person who only speaks up when I have something valuable to input. In D&D, I let my kind of hidden boisterous side pop out where I'm often interjecting or creating these ludicrous ideas or running into combat before anyone else really decides what's going on if I'm playing like a barbarian or something. So it's a nice way to explore different facets of yourself in a very safe environment.
You mentioned that you played online. Is this on
Mhm.
Roll20 or another?
Yeah, we mix between Roll20 and Discord. So
Oh,
we have voice in Discord and then Roll20 for combat maps and rolling dice, monsters and things like that.
all right. As DM, again, how long have you been, besides the campaign of 4 campaigns, you said?
Mhm. Yeah, so just those 4 campaigns. Usually the campaigns will last anywhere from 6 months to a year.
6 months to a year. So, I
The
mean,
ones that I run, yeah, the ones that my friends run, the longest one we've had was 2 years for a campaign.
2 years.
And yeah, it was a long campaign. Sometimes, at least when we first started playing together, we would have 2 weekly sessions. And so I would run one campaign and then someone else would run a different one.
Okay.
Now that 2 of our players or DMs are fathers and we've all kind of gone into more of our professional lives, 'cause most of the folks in this group are late 20s, early 30s, or one guy is in his late 30s. We don't really have that much time. So we just do the weekly session and we have these longer campaigns that play out. Like the current one we started in, I think this February, and it's still going on.
And this is the one that you're still DM of, right? Or are
Yeah, I'm
you
just a player for this one. I may DM the next campaign. We haven't really decided what we're doing yet. We have 2 of our players who are really, really good DMs. And so we often default to them because they enjoy it a lot more than the rest of us.
all right? As a DM itself, do you feel that to carry on for like 6 months to a year, there's a lot of back end work that you need to do?
Yeah. When I'm DMing, I usually have an hour or 2 of preparation before the session. And a lot
Of
of that
each session?
is, yeah, each session. So it's a lot of work. A lot of it's trying to figure out what encounters are going on, figure out who they might speak to, or a lot of guesswork really for what the players might do. Since they realistically have unlimited options, they can choose to do whatever they want. And I have to be able to, in the moment, decide how that affects the short-term story, the long-term story, who they might meet, what different situations they're going to get themselves into, and what speeches maybe villains will write, or what different moments will be prevalent for this story, and then 5 sessions down the road, if they chose to, for example, kill a town mayor who is corrupt, there's ramifications for that they might not immediately see. Maybe the town, instead of having this corrupt mayor, maybe he kept crime in line, and so now bandits are overrunning the town when they come and visit it next. So there's always consequences for actions, and figuring that out, at least getting an idea of what's feasible within the story and the realm, is time consuming, but it's fun. It's a lot of just improv work and guessing and kind of acting in some ways.
I think my ultimate question for that would be that after, let's say, 6 months and a year, or even 2 years for that matter, what exactly do the players get in return at the end? As in, for the time spent, what are they really, besides, of course, good storytelling, great fun with friends, but ultimately the end goal has to still be, let's say, satisfactory. They have to still win the campaign, right?
It kind of depends on your definition of win. There's no traditional win in most campaigns. There's an endpoint.
Okay.
And that endpoint could be vanquishing a great evil or saving, the world or citizens in a town, whatever that is. It really depends on the story, who the players are, and what type of campaign is being run. For example, the endpoint for my favorite campaign was my character getting turned against the party. And so I'd coordinated with the DM, and we decided that my character was going to be the ultimate bad guy in the campaign. And we had this huge fight where we were all working together. And then I had aligned with an ancient green dragon. And so that type of creature is very cunning, very manipulative, very smart, and they're always goal-oriented. And so the dragon imbued powers onto my character, and at the end, I was significantly stronger than each individual party member. And so after we got done with this huge fight, the dragon shows up, my character turns around, and then we have a few brief moments of role-playing and combat, and then the DM ends the campaign right there.
Oh, a little bit of an open ending.
Exactly. And so to answer your question directly, it's the satisfaction of exploring the story and playing together. It's the satisfaction of having a whole bunch of different moments that give you memories that you still reflect on years in the future and smile about or laugh about. We have moments from each of our campaigns where randomly on Discord, one of us will just bring it up, and we'll all start chatting about that and the different aspects of that campaign or the current campaign and how they might relate. It's moments that really are the satisfaction and kind of why we do it.
Okay. And sorry, but the reason why I kind of dragged out this whole topic was I think, related to the whole Dungeons and Dragons guide by Ian Lurie.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to steer you to naturally talk about it so that I could just say in the end, if you replace Dungeon Master yourself with the content marketer and the players as the customers, you basically build out the entire scenario of how digital marketers kind of survive their field.
Yeah, it's a very one-on-one kind of situation with a DM or a good content marketer, or even a marketer in general. The purpose of a good DM is really to provide a great experience for people and help them navigate events and situations in the game. Marketers also essentially do the exact same thing. Our goal is to provide a good experience for customers and help them navigate events and just different challenges in their lives. And so the idea and the concept is really similar. Now, as Ian said in his speech that he gave at a Utah marketing conference and one of the articles he wrote, dungeon masters and marketers really have one job, and that's to facilitate a journey and reward the participants along the way. For example, in D&D, encounters usually fall into 3 things: combat, social, and environmental encounters. And so in marketing, every single interaction point that you have with a customer really can be one of those encounters in a slightly different sense. For example, Let's say you have a customer who is looking at buying new rock climbing shoes. And so they show up, they find your blog individually, and your blog runs on ad referrals and product referrals, so affiliate linking essentially. They show up, they read a blog post about maybe the newest climbing shoes in the industry, and then they come back, and after they thought about it a little while, then they show back up your website and watch a video where maybe you're comparing these shoes side to side, seeing somebody climbing in both of them, breaking down individual aspects of each shoe. So they go away, they do some research on these shoes individually, and then they show back up really to kind of figure out exactly which one they want. There's a referral link, an affiliate link on your website that takes them to the manufacturer store, and it's going to work a lot better. Let's say if you have a discount code or something that really incentivizes them to click through. And then once they visit that store, they go through the store shopping experience. And so each of those moments is a different encounter. And you have to be able to manage just really figuring out what situation somebody is in, what stage they're in, what problem you're trying to solve, and how that plays out. So, a one-to-one relevancy could be, combat is that moment where you have the decision-making point, or a social encounter is where you're trying to get someone to actually stay on your content, and metrics could be like time on page or scroll depth or click-through rates to measure that. And then an environmental encounter could be, are they clicking through to different pages on your site? Are they staying and returning to your website? And are they clicking on those affiliate links or exploring your video content? Essentially just engagement.
Yeah, and it kind of also ties in with the whole building a world aspect and how you can provide, let's say, escape routes for the customers. If you find that they're clicking away from you, you can find a way to get them back into your content and not like completely drive them away.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really where paid advertising is going to come in. And even, organic social media advertising, where you isolate the people who have shown up and you are tracking them through cookies or in other means, especially since cookies are really only lasting 90 days now. And you make sure that you are targeting them where they live. Maybe they got lucky and they sign up for a newsletter. And so you are orienting those newsletters with an onboarding process or an advertisement that really brings up the product or the page or even the concept that they were focusing on. And instead of just hoping they show back up, you're really incentivizing them to show back up. The ads are popping up everywhere. The recommendations are showing up in text ads, in just regular banner ads, or even video ads if you're watching something on YouTube. And it's all encompassing. Sometimes it can get annoying and you essentially are pushing too hard. And that's when you'll usually see a metric drop off significantly. So unique users versus, organic traffic, or you're going to see a unique user versus paid traffic drop off. And so you can try to figure out exactly who's returning and who's not based on the cookie relevance. And once you have that information, you know if you're going too hard. If you see a significant drop off or if you see a significant spike, then you know your campaign is working well.
You had mentioned scroll of depth and time on page, and it is part of the engagement KPIs you had mentioned for, I think, the top 16.
Yeah, and so when we look at engagement and just essentially metrics and KPIs as a whole, we're usually falling into 3 different categories. So conversion, engagement, and reputation. Conversion can be anything like a lead, a transaction, a goal completion, revenue, things like that. If you're looking at engagement, we're often looking at any point of interaction with a customer. So maybe they left a comment on a blog post or a review of a product. We're looking at specific metrics like a scroll depth, time on page, pages per session, click-through rate, things like that. And then reputation is usually what people are saying about your brand. So influencer marketing mentions, looking at individual keyword ranks or keyword ranks as a whole, and then discussing or analyzing what people are discussing about your brand who are not influencers. So just regular customers looking on places like Quora or Reddit or Twitter, Facebook, etc. and how much share of voice you actually command in SERPs. So essentially how many times your articles or your product pages, whatever, are showing up for a specific topic, and how many you have and how much space you can just take up in comparison to other ranking options.
Oh, one other thing was in reputation KPI was sentiment analysis.
Yeah, so that's a project that I kind of touched on, but I didn't mention by name. Sentiment analysis is just something that I decided to do for a few clients one day.
Okay.
And it's looking at exactly how the client projects themselves and what their beliefs are for how customers experience them versus reality. So I'll go through and I will look at direct mentions on Twitter. I'll go through looking at whatever people will show up on Reddit just by doing a site search, not on the platform, but using the site search parameters in Google. So that way I actually get everything that shows up in different languages, and it's not relying on a social media platform's iffy search engine. Same thing looking at Quora, and then just regular mentions either by influencers or product experts, depending on what type of situation a brand has, looking at what competitors are saying. And then I compile all of that and give the client kind of a hard reality check where it's like, here's what you think is going on.
Yeah.
Here's what people actually think about you. And here's what we need to change to amalgamate the two.
Okay.
It's always an interesting conversation.
The one thing is that I think on that article that you've written itself, you've mentioned how a mix of one or two could be used in different ways.
Yeah, and a lot of that really depends on what your goals are and what type of metrics and KPIs you're trying to achieve, and what type of content you're promoting as well. Let's say you are a recipe website and all of your money comes from affiliate links and advertising. And your KPIs in this way are more than likely going to be all engagement and then a little bit of reputation. And so those two may overlap with likes and shares or backlinks, influencer mentions, but on each individual page, you're probably looking at click-through rate, bounce rate, exit rate for metrics, maybe scroll depth and time on page, those type of things, and then seeing how those correlate with things like share of voice. If you have specific pages that are showing up in maybe Google Discover, are those performing better than a page that's just not showing up at all in search rankings or not in Google Discover or any other type of feature or function from a SERP or a search engine? And so those two different aspects and different, I guess, dichotomies will really help you figure out where customers are and what you should be measuring and how those two interplay.
I kind of feel like some questions I ask always end with it depends on what you're looking for. And
yeah, unfortunately, that's the end result for a lot of content marketing.
Yeah, there was another question I had asked earlier, which was paid advertising versus organic. And the answer was just depends on what your goals are. You can pretty much use one or the other.
Yeah, you can. I really like those two to be closely related. I've seen a lot more success for clients if you go through the entire process of really having a very consistent full circle funnel. And I don't think that they should be as separated as they are in people's minds, because if you have an organic page, somebody interacts with it for a while, and then they leave, the organic page has to do a lot. You have to have all of the information that Google wants, or whatever search engine you're trying to use. You have to make sure that you're getting enough information so the maybe not as intelligent with this specific situation or product or experience is a better word. Okay. Or figuring out also for the people who are experienced in your industry, you have to balance those two things. You have to balance the information, you have to balance how it's presented and what the story is, versus a specific paid landing page that you have designed specifically for someone in a, say, late to mid funnel situation where they're ready to convert or they're on that borderline. And you can redesign that page for paid advertising where you don't have to worry about Google whatsoever. You can solely focus on that conversion. And if you're marketing and advertising toward those people who have shown up at that page and trying to get them to return to that paid page, you're going to be able to see exactly how that plays out. And if your really conversion marketing language on the organic page is relevant for the paid page, or you see a huge difference in performance between the two, and then you can figure out and tweak both pages to figure out what the ideal situation is and what the ideal language is, the ideal story, and really determining how those will interplay and what customers want to see from your site.
We could probably say that this is where digital marketers and, well, sales teams have to have that collaboration to at least leverage their pros in their own field.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that I don't see enough of the clients or just marketing in general is people coordinating with their sales team. I'm really surprised most of the time that we sign on with a new client, there's either so much red tape in the way for our contacts, essentially the company's marketing lead and their sales team to interact or to even just discuss things. And with that disconnect, the marketers are often using social media metrics or just their intuitiveness to figure out what people want, and they're not getting hard data. And the sales team, especially for a B2B company, is that real last point of interaction. And they can figure out things like what excites customers or what worries them, and the common questions people are asking that you may not know as a marketing expert, simply because you're working with incomplete data. So if you actually sit down with a sales team and make that coordination, have that conversation, you can really figure out the common misconceptions people are worrying about and conversion factors that you may not consider. And so I think that conversation is crucial. And it's something that I try to achieve with any client that we get. I want to set up interviews with their sales team, or I will give our client contact questions to ask their sales team and then make sure that we get that information in return so we can be tweaking product pages or landing pages, whatever we're working on, and make sure that we're giving customers what they want. Because if you're not doing that, you really run the risk of providing a bad or unsatisfactory experience. A study by Invoca earlier this year, I believe it was this year, they showed that 76% of US customers will stop doing any type of business with a brand after a single bad experience. And from a marketing perspective, a bad experience is usually when they show up with expectations and you don't meet those expectations. Maybe your title and meta description provide a very different experience and set very different expectations than what they see when they actually land on the product page. Or maybe you are trying to target a mid to late funnel user, but you have way too much high level content where you're just like defining terms and providing a lot of education up front where these educated users don't care about that. And so you have that difference and that break, and learning what that is based on your sales team conversation or something like a sentiment analysis really can help you solve that problem preemptively. And so you don't have to worry about people leaving the brand because you know exactly what they want by hearing exactly what they're telling your team, and you can preemptively solve for all of those problems. Maybe they want a specific answer about a product or they have specific concerns. Well, you can address those immediately at the top of the page. Discuss the pros to products, discuss the cons, and compare those against competitors so people can make an educated choice about what's best for them.
But is there any reason why companies do this? Is there a reason why there's such a huge gap and people don't see it as a problem?
The most common thing I found is C-suite level folks value the time of the sales team more than they value the time of the marketing team. And so they figure any point that the sales team is not selling, that means that they're getting less revenue or less leads. And that becomes red tape that the marketing team just is struggling to break through with. And so I think that there needs to be a greater conversation within those agencies that are serving companies or within the companies themselves to break down those barriers and really figure out what is causing them and address those concerns. Because as you said, if you can't do that, you can't take that common sense step, you're not going to get the results that you want because you're just shooting in the dark.
I mean, I'm assuming this is how it works at Portent as well, right?
Yeah, whenever I'm on a client account, as I mentioned, I really try to get those conversations set up, and I often don't succeed, unfortunately. Often there are just a lot of moments where we'll get client pushback, or they say that their sales team is too busy to set up an interview with us, or just there are endless excuses. And breaking through that is part of what we as consultants have to do, or we have to figure out ways around it.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what is the workaround for that? Do you take the time to explain it to the client, or you just go like, nah, it's not worth my time?
I will always try to explain it and show the client what they're missing. I like the strategy of creating a fear of missing out with clients, showing that here are the consequences for not doing this action. Maybe we can project through analytics and through search metrics that you'll get X amount more visitors if you answer this question properly. And based on your current conversion rate, you'll get this many more conversions. And currently, by not doing this, you're missing out on this much revenue. Usually that helps. Some clients are really stubborn and they're very ego-driven. And so we have to really appeal to that ego and make them essentially think that this is their idea.
Okay.
And for those clients, a lot of the work is helping them understand why this will benefit them. And I get that approach. And I get that why people may be ego-driven. And it's not necessarily a bad thing because at the end of the day, we're here to make them look smart to their bosses.
Yeah.
And it's their job on the line, not ours. And so the better we can make them look, the more cohesive and just great ideas that we can provide, then they can take to their bosses and show, here's all these ideas that I've thought of, and here's how it's going to help us.
And in that way, I think the case studies really come through and help.
Yeah, sometimes, not every agency or organization gets case studies to appeal to their users, but for the most part, case studies are a very relevant and prominent aspect of any marketing funnel. And they do really help with that. They actually show, at least they should be showing, very specific statistics and very specific scenarios that are relatable. And hopefully people can actually understand what's going on.
Yeah, because we do quite a few case studies, and just to show again how our services work and how we can help other clients, I think it kind of serves as a way to eliminate that conversation sometimes, that we don't really need to tell you what we can do. We can literally show you what we can do.
Exactly. Yeah, and that really helps also figure out what people care about. You can see which case studies get more engagement and make sure you have language about that in your product page.
How long have you been with them?
5 years as of January.
And has it always been content and marketing related?
Yeah. I've always worked in the content strategy team. I've had different roles through there, and I do coordination with different parts of the agency. So I work a lot with the SEO team, with our off-page SEO team, which is really all about getting backlinks and influencer marketing, things like that. Our PPC team to a fair extent, and a little bit with our social media team. So I work with most of our teams. I don't really work closely with dev unless we're rebuilding a website or something. We do have a content strategy team that will handle essentially anything content related. We typically focus on analysis and trying to answer the big questions, or setting an entire strategy for an account and helping clients, if they know what their KPIs and goals are, achieve those. And if they don't, help them set what their KPIs and goals should be, and then working with them to figure out how you can achieve. A lot of the analysis that we do, it could be basic things like a content audit, figuring out how content is performing, what content needs to be rewritten or improved, or what content just shouldn't be on the site at all. And then looking at UX, usability. Sometimes we'll help out with copywriting, but not usually. We usually provide things like copy briefs that I mentioned before to really get the client to write their own content and try to help them be self-sustaining, and teaching them essentially how to do what we would do for them. That way, if eventually all clients leave. And so when they do that, we really want to make sure that they're set up for success. and that they can keep everything running smoothly in-house, or at least translate that information to the next agency that they might work with.
Yeah, it's kind of good that I let you go first, because my next question was going to be totally off another topic altogether. But you mentioned auditing content for better performance. You've also done, like, I think, I don't know if you did a talk on this or if this was an article that you had written.
Yeah, it's a case study. Well, not necessarily a case study, but a general experiment that I did. I earlier this year looked at 60 different blog posts on Portent's website, and they ranked everywhere. Some didn't rank at all. They had like maybe one or two keywords. Other ones had answer boxes, or people also asked snippets. And I wanted to see how Google treats different types of updates. So I did a handful of different rewrite strategies. One, I took 20 posts that we had completely rewritten from scratch the year prior. And then I updated manually by myself 40 different posts. And so I was comparing the 3 different, I guess, post categories and update categories. So we had the full rewrites. We had ones that I did just a metadata and an introduction update. So sometimes the introduction updates were really small, and all I did was change a few words, or I rewrote the entire introduction, or I compressed things and compiled it. And then updating the title tag and the meta description alongside the H1, so the page title.
And
Other
published
things,
date as well, or
published date as well. Yeah, thanks for reminding me about that.
I was going to ask that later on, but we'll finish this
Yeah.
part first.
Yeah, and then the last core category is just updating the published date. And so I didn't touch a single thing in the article, just here, Google, these are new published articles. Have fun. The results honestly were a bit scary, and I really hope Google fixes what I discovered, because in my mind, content should be only ranking if it's actually valuable content and solves the user's problem.
Yeah.
I got content to rank that was 12 years old and didn't solve anything. I got first page ranking for that, for just updating a published date.
Okay.
So it's kind of scary. Like the 20 rewritten blog post, they had an average keyword gain of 454%. And we got a shared feature snippet between 2 different articles. So Google was trying to figure out our article versus a different one, and they were testing which one was getting more clicks. And as a whole, the update group received 18 first page rankings. And some of those rankings existed before and they just improved. Some of them decreased, but they got new rankings alongside of it. And for this study, when I'm saying keyword growth, what I mean is the total number of keywords, not necessarily keywords ranking in first place or anywhere else. And I'm measuring those keywords by Ahrefs and just how many keywords they're reporting. And then I compared that growth number when I pulled all of the end results of the study, because I let things run for 3 months. No, I'm sorry, I let things run for a full month. And then I pulled that data from either the last time the content was updated, or for the 40 pages that I manually updated, the published date for all of those, and then compared it to the previous year at the same time. So we get a year-over-year view.
How long did all of this take? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, I think I put about 40 hours into the project between figuring out what pages to do, figuring out what level of updates, and then measuring the results and checking in on them.
Okay. Because I don't want to tell people to, hey, you should probably do this as well. But like the results are pretty much speak for themselves.
Yeah, I'm going to give you the stats for the other 2 results because they're even more astonishing. Okay. So when I updated just the title, the metadata, the published date, and the introduction, that batch of 20 earned an average keyword growth of 1,081%. We got 5 featured snippets, an image pack, and 38 cumulative first page rankings.
All from just
doing about 5 to 10 minutes of work on the page. So each of those pages, took me a couple hours to update all of them. That's the type of update that I'm now recommending for any client. Any type of article that they need to be evergreen, or even articles that don't need to be evergreen, but are still relevant. Every single year, up to twice a year, I'm recommending that they update the title, the metadata, the page title, and publish date. Just make those look new, or tweak them in small ways, add new data, and try to make them still relevant and useful. But if you can't do that, still just update it, because you're going to see gains. And you're almost getting guaranteed gains simply by doing that, which is kind of terrifying because you're not always making the content better. You're just making it look newer. Yeah, you're just essentially harping and manipulating Google's freshness metrics.
So, for, let's say, the rewrite and a short update and a little bit in the title and metadata. Like for me, I believe that those are still a gray area of, disingenuine and genuine. You're still technically updating content. My curiousness comes in when we talk about the publish date and changing that. And how ethical technically is that? And should we even care if it's ethical or not?
I think the ethics are going to be up to the individual. I find it unethical. I don't like that strategy personally.
But it works.
But it works. Like the update, just the publish date group, 475% more keywords. And articles, as a whole earned 45 cumulative first page rankings. We got 2 featured snippets and 1 people also ask answer just for uploading the publish date. So it works. And I think depending on what the content is, it could be ethical. If it's something that is still fully relevant, the update or the information is still up to date, and you're just making sure that it's still being found by people, and those people are actually getting something useful from it, then sure, go ahead and update the publish date. I've done that before for some buyer's guides for clients where we discuss from intro level information down to conversion information, everything someone should know about their product. And that information is still relevant next year. Nothing has changed. Versus something like some of the posts that I had in this study, they were 10, 12 years old, and the information was completely irrelevant, out to date. Some of the factors weren't even present in search engine results anymore. Just algorithm updates, things like that. And I still got those to improve just by updating the publish date. To me, that is super unethical because I'm presenting misinformation at that point if those get to the first page. And that's where I think Google needs to take more responsibility with its algorithm and fix that. They should be analyzing individual pages and making sure that in comparison to everything else that is ranking or their domain, just knowledge and topic knowledge, that things are actually relevant and there's a consensus about what's going on. And they are working on that, trying to fight disinformation. But I did the study this year. I started it in January and did it in March. And essentially I got away with it. Like some of these pages lost their rankings. Some of them continue to gain rankings, and some of them just kind of stayed the same after the updates. But it shouldn't be that way. In an ideal world, only the full rewrites where you're really adding more information, you're really creating a comparison against competitive content, whether that's direct competitors or SERP competitors, and providing as much useful information as possible, those are the ones that should be ranking, not updating the publish date on a 10-year-old article and saying, oh, cool, I got a first page result for that.
But I think it's hard for Google to figure out an algorithm to sort that out if they're also having difficulty finding out if content written is also genuine content.
Yeah, it really is. Like they're making progress with that with, your money, your life topics, but it is a really tricky thing to solve. The last thing that I've read about this is they're trying to do a kind of a consensus analysis where if the top rankings are all saying the same thing, but in different ways, it's probably relevant. And then comparing that information against very reputable resources, whether that's a news organization, like say the New York Times or the BBC, or just places that have a lot of prestige and they take a lot of care about their resource, like Wikipedia. They're comparing that information against the search results and making sure that there's a consensus. How well that's going to work in the long term, I don't know. I think it's a great first step, though.
If, let's say, you do take the consensus and the top 4 links lead you to content that have AI generated content, how then does it work? I'm sorry if this is a stretch, by the way. I thought it
No,
was
no,
pretty
that's
chill.
it's completely fine.
Okay.
AI generated content is a little bit weird because it's gotten to the point where it's very difficult to discern if it's computer written or human written. There are small quirks and small tweaks that you can notice depending on how the AI is set up, that you'll notice a tone and voice difference. But a lot of writing AIs can analyze an original author's tone and voice and then mimic that based on a word choice, punctuation usage, and other factors. And it gets really hard to tell the difference. I don't know if that's going to be a problem, though, because it might be a problem for writers who may be out of a job, but you
Yeah.
still have to have someone who can actually validate that content and make sure that the AI is pulling in relevant information. And that does require manual touch. You have to make sure that they're getting proper resources and they're not pulling in misinformation just because of a high domain authority or something that showed up in Google News, but is not actually relevant. And that does need to continue to happen. I think Google being able to discern if it is a human that wrote the article or an AI is irrelevant, because if the piece is still useful for an end user, that's all that matters.
Yeah. Because if you do, let's say, need to refresh your content and you don't feel like you can rewrite an entire article, you could just throw it into an AI copywriting machine, let's say, and then it
Yeah.
should, generate a decent enough article. Granted, you do need someone who can mediate that content and make sure it's good. But
Yeah. And there are tools like SEMrush has a content analysis tool that will do a lot of that work for you, where you can essentially do an audit on all of your content within a subfolder of your website, and they will come back to you based on current search trends and show you all of the things that you're missing or all of the current mistakes that you're making and how to fix those. And of course, because it's a product, they want you to hire their writers to fix that, but you can always take that away, put that information in an AI content writing, and just have it fix it for you by setting whatever parameters you need to fix.
there was something else in the topics that we had written down, that you had mentioned tools to use for content marketing and for analysis and competitor analysis, I believe. So instead of asking the podcast question or the 3 books, what are the 3 tools that you would recommend people to use to improve their content?
Sure, I rely on Ahrefs for any type of search result information. I like SEMrush for content analysis, especially if I'm doing a very large batch of, let's say, a blog audit of 200 pages. It allows me to pull in Google Tag Manager data and Google Search Console data alongside analytics to figure out exactly how things are performing, and I don't have to manually pull all that information, and then it gives a recommendation. So that's really useful just to save time. And then Hotjar, it's a heat tracking and kind of survey generating platform where I can measure clicks on specific UX elements. I can have recordings to actually watch what a user is doing throughout their entire journey. And it really allows me to hone in on what elements of a product page or a blog or whatever are working and which ones aren't, and then tweak the order or remove or add things based on that information. I'm trying to think of the other ones that are relevant, because those are the things that I use the most. If you're doing any type of user research or you want a lot of information, Usability Hub is another good one. You can hire surveys, or you can hire people for surveys, essentially set your demographics, send out your surveys. Sometimes those can be working on the specific wording of a navigation or navigation grouping. Sometimes you're having someone test a paginated form, and essentially you set your demographics, and then the company finds users that fit that demographic, and they get paid to take your survey or do your test, whatever it is. That one can be very useful. It is often very expensive to do, though.
This might be a really big ask. How would you tie together this entire podcast conversation that we had and relate it again back to D&D?
Yeah, sure. A lot of that is all about encounters and stories. So figuring out what story your users want to hear based on talking to your sales team and gathering information from your competitors and what people are saying online, or directly in feedback, whatever resources you have, and making sure that every interaction point solves a problem that they're facing in their real life, and making sure that the problems you solve are relevant and you're solving them in a way that makes them educated to make a proper choice that's best for them. And sometimes that choice is not going to be with your brand or company, but you're empowering them. And you are making sure that those users or customers, whatever category that they're in, are able to make their lives better because they stop by your site or they interacted with your brand.
Cool. I think that's well summed up. I mean, a lot better than what I would have done in the beginning itself. To kind of drift away from what we have been talking about in general, one question I have been asking most guests is, this is again completely unrelated to the topics we have been talking about,
Sure.
and is it more into personal life? But and again, you have full reason to decline the question, but how do you manage mental health challenges while being at work?
That is a great question. And it's a very interesting scenario for a lot of people. The entire Portent team is now work from home.
Yeah, same
And
extent.
right. It's also interesting for me because I have, major depressive disorder. And I've been struggling with it a lot for the past 2 months due to life scenarios. And so for me, it's been really relying on and trusting my leadership team. So my direct manager and our directors at Portent, and trusting them to help me when I just mentally or emotionally can't handle a workday. Sometimes it's me saying, hey, I have to take the rest of this day off, or I need to reschedule these internal projects, or I'll work with our client partner team, which are essentially project managers, and tell them I'm going to need to push this deadline. It's not, the client doesn't need this right now, and I need to take a mental health day. So it really comes down to building a good relationship with your leadership team and being able to trust them and having good leaders. Because if you have, let's say, a micromanager, someone who really is just a middleman between the C-suite and the employees producing revenue or producing the resources for the company, oftentimes it doesn't work out well. But if you have someone who is genuinely empathetic, they care about your success, they're investing resources into you to make sure that you're doing a good job and that you are prepared to serve clients, whether that's through education or one-on-one chats, so you get to know each other better every week, that really builds a bond. And that bond allows the manager or the executive team, leadership team, whatever you have at your company, to trust you more as an individual person. And that level of trust, it makes it easier when you have struggles. Maybe you're just burnt out, or maybe like you're in my case where you just can't do the work. You just have too much going on. And they give you that levity, they give you that space, and they know that the work will get done, but it won't get done if they push you to do it right now, or at least it won't get done well because you just physically or mentally or emotionally can't do it.
Yeah, you don't have the capacity, let's say, at that point. But
Exactly, you don't have enough margin.
But let's say you do take that day off and you do have, well, you take time off from work and you have an understanding company and leadership team that at least fairly understands what you're going through.
Mm-hmm.
How would you at least spend that time though? Because some might just take a day off and then just continue going into their coping mechanisms, which might not be good entirely. Again, you don't have to answer if you don't feel like.
No, that's totally fine. It depends on what's going on with me. Sometimes if I'm burnt out, I will go rock climbing or go hiking, whatever I need to do to change just my physical environment, get out of the house and get into nature. If I'm having a really rough time, maybe I just need to sleep most of the day, just so I don't have to constantly be thinking of things. Or I will try to distract myself with video games or puzzles. It just kind of depends on what I need in the moment. And as you said, sometimes those coping mechanisms aren't always the healthiest options. And people may need to work with outside help to figure out, what a healthy coping mechanism is so that they can return to work either at least refreshed enough to get the immediate tasks done and to push through to a day off, maybe it's the weekend or whatever else, or manage that stress more appropriately so they don't get burnt out and they can communicate with their leadership team beforehand when they're approaching that burnout and saying, hey, I need to slow down, or let's delegate this work to someone else in our team to make sure that they don't reach that phase. So they don't have to worry about finding those mechanisms and taking that time off.
I've been kind of angling at it, but therapy as an option, is it kind of not frowned upon, but is it something that not a lot of people go for because they feel their coping mechanisms are good enough? Or is it just not normalized enough yet for people to just go out and have a talk?
I think it's getting better. I think that the stigma around therapy is decreasing. It's becoming more acceptable. And this is just based on anecdotal evidence. I don't have any data to support that, but there is a shortage of therapists, at least in the US. So versus the amount of people who need help and then who can supply it, especially since COVID started, people are struggling a lot more with depression or anxiety and just the weight of the world, and there aren't enough people to help them. So I think that is the bigger issue right now versus people not wanting help. They just can't get it.
It's kind of almost the same here itself in India. We do also have quite a few people who need it, but then just not a lot of people who can help out.
It's a tough situation to be in. And I've been fortunate enough that I can afford to see a therapist, and I see them pretty frequently. And it's been definitely beneficial for me throughout my life. It's not for everyone, but I certainly encourage everyone who can see a therapist to give it a shot if they need help, because it can be transformative if you're willing to be vulnerable and actually do the work.
Also. Yeah.
One
thing I think we're trying to do it on our end too, but would you recommend or advise companies to hire in a company lawyer, in-house lawyer? I mean, a lawyer, what am I saying? Psychiatrist, a therapist, it's a...
I think it's a tricky situation. I would encourage people to do that, but I think there's a trust situation that employees may be hesitant to go to someone hired by the company.
Right.
Simply because either maybe that person doesn't groove well with what they need, or they don't have the right experience, or they're worried that information may be passed up the chain, which at least in the US is illegal, but it could happen and it may not be reported. And they're worried about how that would affect their job.
I thought
it's illegal for a therapist to share private information with their client to an outside source without that client's direct approval.
Oh, all right. I was always under the impression client confidentiality just meant I'm not telling anyone ever.
It's essentially it. Yeah, client confidentiality is that, but you can sue your therapist if they do break that confidentiality agreement. Yeah. Without your approval.
So wait, if a company hires, again, this is just me trying to understand. If a company does hire a therapist for in-house needs, are they privy for information from whatever employees do talk?
Technically, no. To my knowledge, absolutely not. And like our Portent's parent company, ClearLink, does have in-house therapy as a resource for their essentially in-person employees. And they also offer, virtual therapy sessions for people who aren't in-house. And I think the ideal route for this would be a company supplying a stipend for their employees to use for therapy, saying you can use this for whoever you want, whoever you think will help you and meet your needs. And then it just comes out of whatever budget they have. And if they need more, then they can ask for more and appeal for it, and hopefully the company will grant it. I think that's the best solution because people can get a personalized result in comparison to in-house, where even though therapists should not be sharing anything with a company because that would be a gross violation of ethics. Yeah. There's still probably that hesitancy in people. I've certainly been hesitant to go to an in-house therapist that the company paid for, just because there's that fear, and that fear is illogical, but it lingers.
Yeah. There's also
It
that
lingers
weird.
because like I'm not choosing the person. The person is provided.
I'm not too sure this applies as well, but from what I've heard through my sessions, are that sharing a therapist among people you do know might not always also be the best idea. I'm not too sure how well that works out, but essentially, if I go to a therapist and you go to the same therapist, it might not be great.
I don't know. I can't really comment on that. I've never run into that situation.
No, yeah, I was trying to relate that if the company had a therapist and then everyone went to the same one, I really don't know how that would work. They all would just be, well, talking to one person and that person just has to deal with it all.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and it could very well be that person gets overwhelmed, or they start mixing advice between different employees, or they're using knowledge from one client to directly help the other client, let's say with interpersonal conflict among coworkers, or a lot of different things. It could be beneficial because you just have more working information, but it could also be really detrimental. I just haven't really thought about that much
Yeah, I
to
think
give you
what
a
you
hard
said,
answer.
but what you said makes more sense to have like a stipend that you can just see your own personal therapist with.
Mm-hmm.
It would be a lot better that way.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Again, the reason why I'm bringing all of this up is purely because the conversation around mental health isn't that prominent amongst, well, professionals itself. So I thought I would try to kind of normalize it by at least bringing it up with everyone I do talk to, see what their take is and how they can help others.
I'm glad you're
Um,
doing that. It's a really important subject, and I think the more we can normalize it, the better off people will be.
do you mind if we chat a bit more for like maybe 10 more minutes or so? Do
No,
you
that's
have
totally
it?
fine. I just need to message a colleague really quick to let them know I will not be in this internal meeting.
So 3 media you would recommend.
Sure. I'm going to throw in a twist there. There's a newsletter for any either search marketer or content marketer that I really recommend, and it's called SEO FOMO.
Okay.
It's incredibly useful. Every single week, the creator sends out top articles, people to follow in the industry, and some related content alongside usually like a case study that a company will promote to be in the newsletter. It's really popular and it is extremely good. It's one that I read every week. The podcasts that I recommend, they're not marketing related. I really like the podcast Snap Judgment. It's just a storytelling podcast where a lot of unique and sometimes weird stories are told. And they're told with a fun ambience and in a very powerful method. Often we get interviews with the actual people telling the story, or it's just a recreation of the events. It's really good. It's been running for a really long time. And then kind of in a similar but different vein, the podcast Science Versus. It's really just a podcast look at popular topics either in media or in science, and then breaking down fact versus fiction.
Are these all, I mean, both of them are available on Spotify, Apple?
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, both pretty much both those are available on Spotify. That's where I listen to them. And then the newsletter you just have to sign up for.
Is there also like a social media channel for them? YouTube
I don't
or
know. I know there's social media channels for the 2 podcasts I recommended. I don't know about the newsletter though.
I can just wait. So is it a website that I can just visit or?
It should be. Let me check for you. Type that in really quick.
Because I think I've heard of SEO FOMO from another colleague. I just never really went into it.
Yeah. The website is actually the person who puts it together. I'll plop it in chat for you. It's Aletus Solus.
All right. Because
So
we will be
here's her
mentioning
URL.
All right, cool. Because we will be at least trying to link to some of them if we could mention at least in the transcript that these are the books to recommend and
Sure.
podcasts to listen to.
Yeah, absolutely. Regarding books, I have one marketing recommendation, one kind of life recommendation, and one fiction technically, but it has a lot of just quality life advice. The marketing one is called Nicely Said. It is a fantastic book for anyone who writes professionally. It really breaks down the basic elements of content strategy and helps you understand how to write for a user, what types of writing you should do, how to write with different tones and voice, and the ultimate goals you should be pursuing. I recommend it to anyone who's getting started either in writing, copywriting, or content strategy. Another one that is relatively interesting, it kind of depends on what you are trying to achieve, is How to Fail at Everything and Still Succeed. It's written by the author who created the Dilbert comic strip, and it's kind of just his life story about how he struggled to make it, and when he made it, how he was still struggling with things like imposter syndrome. And he lays out essentially a series of steps to help you manage those situations when you are failing, and so you can turn those failures into success.
Sorry to go back a bit. Nicely Said is by Kate Kiefer Lee and Nicole Fenton.
Yep.
All right, cool. Just trying to make sure I keep track of all of that.
Yeah, I think How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Succeed is by Scott Adams.
Oh, I just wrote it down as the Dilbert character because I remember Dilbert. But yeah, I'll make sure to mention all of this.
Cool.
Sorry to cut you off, but the third one?
The third one is The Way of the Peaceful Warrior by Dan Millman. It's a novelized narrative of his life, and it just presents a lot of very useful life advice and approaches to life that helped me in very difficult time periods. And I still reread it pretty frequently, but in a very easy to digest manner. And it's one of those books that kind of hits you differently every time you read it based on what you're going through and what life experiences you've had since the last time you read it.
I actually think someone might have recommended this book earlier, so I think we should put it up to the top of the list because this has been the second time.
Yeah, I mean, it ties in really well with the mental health thing too.
I have taken actually a lot more than your time and stuff. I think this is almost a 1.5 hour podcast.
No worries, it was fun to chat.